Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Michael Dixon. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this session that we are hosting as part of the Graduate Student Professional Network, an organization designed primarily for the professional development of you, our graduate students. That organization has not really been active much over the last year and a half, but it's something I'd really like to try to get up and going again and to create more opportunities like this and some others for all of you. It's my pleasure to be joined this afternoon with my colleague, Dr. Trent Engbers. I'm going to turn it over to him for a moment to introduce himself.
Yes, so hello. It's nice to see a couple of familiar faces on the call and a couple of new people who are joining us today. My name's Trent Engbers. I teach in the public administration program at USI and primarily in the areas of nonprofit management. And I've had the opportunity over the few years to work with a number of organizations, especially those who are having reductions in their workforce, helping their employees think about their resumes and how they put their resumes together in such a way to maximize their success as they move forward in their careers. And so today, Dr. Dixon and I are going to be sharing with you some of our experience in terms of working with resumes, advice that we've seen in the many resumes that we've come across the years. We're going to try and make this pretty interactive. We've got some opening comments. We're going to look at some resumes together. And so we're going to, at that point in time, invite your participation. And then we'll end with some specific advice that we think are things that may not often get discussed in terms of resumes, but are tips that help you really stand out amongst the crowd.
Thank you, Dr. Engbers. And I'll just mention, too, that if at any time you want to ask a question, by all means, put it into the chat. If it's a point when I'm speaking, Dr. Engbers will try to monitor that. And if he is speaking, I will try to monitor that too. We will absolutely make every endeavor to address all of the questions and comments that you may have throughout the course of our time together. So that said, this idea to host this development workshop on writing a resume or a curriculum vitae really has been one percolating in my mind for a while. As some of you may know, as current graduate students at USI, several of our programs require the submission of a resume or a CV as part of the application process. So I have the opportunity to read through quite a few CVs during the course of a given day and a lot during the course of a given admission cycle. And, there are a lot of things that I see in the course of those reviews. And I've often thought it would be a really great thing to bring a group of students together to talk about the significance of a resume, the significance of a CV, and how important that is in making a positive first impression upon an admissions officer or a potential employer in particular. And that's relevant to every one of you on this call. You are currently a graduate student. You may intend to pursue further graduate study after completing your degree program at USI. One way or the other, you'll be looking for employment down the road, or perhaps promotion within the company or business at which you're currently employed. All of those paths will almost absolutely require that you submit an up-to-date current resume or CV. And I want to try to make this session work as something that will benefit you, whatever those pathways might be. Dr. Engbers and I are both, like every other program director at USI, concerned with and committed to your success in the classroom right now, but equally so, we're committed to your success beyond the classroom in whatever endeavor it is upon which you embark. And a CV is in many ways the first step towards success. It's the key to getting noticed. So we're going to, just really give a few observations after I conclude some general remarks, and we'll go from there in at times formal and informal basis. But I'd just like to return now for a moment to the point at which I began, where I mentioned that as part of my job reviewing applicant submissions, I have the opportunity to read quite a few CVs, quite a few resumes. And I am often struck by a few things, and I'll just call those in the broad category, inaccuracies, probably at best. At worst, one might even claim that they are false claims or false statements. And oftentimes what I do is I either personally or one of my admissions assistants will reach out to the applicant for clarification on that inconsistency or that point on the CV, on the resume that needs some clarification. In the real world, in the business world, an employer, a potential employer, one hiring, might not do that. They might at that point just simply move on to the next applicant. That's a scenario you certainly want to avoid. Another worst case scenario might be that you're hired for a position or given a promotion, and subsequent to that, your employer ascertains that the application you submitted with the resume you submitted contained false or unverifiable claims in a CV that could lead to potentially termination. I see that Kim just posted a comment on the chat in terms of how I know or can determine if a inaccuracy exists on a CV. One of the things that I pay particular attention to are is the educational component of one's resume. And I shared this with Dr. Engbers last week. And I read a resume, and the applicant was applying for a specific program here. And on his resume, he had indicated that he had already earned that degree at a different institution. That person had not submitted any transcripts from the institution at which he claimed to have earned the degree, nor was there any other indication from anything else in his application that he had. So I asked my admissions assistant to reach out to him, and he was extremely apologetic, indicated that he had at one point applied to and been accepted into that program at that university, but had chosen not to attend. This was 6 to 9 months ago, I think he had said, and was now applying to the same program at USI, but hadn't ever updated his CV in that interim period. Now, often the inaccuracies are oversights or failures to update a CV or a resume on a regular basis. And I suppose often or sometimes an inaccuracy on a CV is intentional. Kim, another way by which I can determine an inaccuracy is in the employment section of a CV. If someone says they worked in a job from 2018 to 2020, and that they were also working in another job between 2019 and 2020, and that they were in possibly different locations from one another, and there was no indication that either was remote work. The inaccuracies, I think I'm just using that term as a broad overview. I mean, I guess red flag might be another way to describe it, just things that don't add up, things that make the reviewer of the CV ask questions. And you don't want a reviewer of your resume to be asking questions like that. You want to generate enthusiasm for who you are as the first impression. Dr. Engbers, sorry.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I was going to add one other thing that I think is particularly important in this area. Is that many of the professional networks are tight knit. That when you are applying for a job, someone at that job is going to know someone at another job that you may have listed on your resume, and that those social interactions, those professional interactions, transmit information that may not be on your resume. And so there are numerous examples that I might have of locally of people having insight into embellishments or inaccuracies on resumes just because of the nature of how tight-knit many of the professional communities are around here.
Yeah, I'd give one more example as well, and it goes back to the academic piece. I have read resumes where an applicant indicates that a degree had been earned from a specific institution, and oftentimes the individual indicates what the grade point average earned was at that institution. I think in many job situations, a potential employer might ask for a CV, but might not also ask for the transcripts. Here in an academic institution, we request both. So if someone tells me they had a 3.9 GPA as an undergraduate, I can look at the undergraduate transcript and determine if a 3.9 was in fact earned. And sometimes there's a significant discrepancy there. These are not the types of first impressions you want to make. So the first rule for me, the point of the greatest emphasis for me is accuracy. You really want the information you present to be accurate. And Dr. Engbers and I talked about this a bit last week too, that one of the best practices we can recommend, something that he and I both do, is regularly update our CV. There was a time I didn't do that, and 6 months, 12 months later, I might sit down and say, oh, I need to make some additions to my CV, and I've forgotten something, or I can't remember exactly when something was, and this type of effort on recollection alone can lead to inaccuracies in reporting, and again, that being something you really, really, really want to avoid. And I'm going to just, in terms of my sort of remarks here to sort of frame where we go, just touch on one more thing. And I've used the terms quite a few times already, but I've used resume and I've used curriculum vitae, or CV. And I think it's fair to say that not everyone understands all of the nuances or all of the differences between the one and the other. And they can be somewhat significant. So a really important thing to do as a applicant for a job, for an academic spot in a program, is to make sure you know what the institution to whom you're submitting your materials, what it is they're asking for. Make sure you know what they want, and you customize, you craft what you submit to fit the application of the institution at which you're seeking employment, or in which you're seeking acceptance into an academic program. In short, curriculum vitae is a longer document, something that really embodies your lifelong work, all of the accomplishments you really want to highlight over a long period of time. In addition to directing graduate studies, I also have taught for many years at USI Latin. So curriculum vitae is a term which I see often misspelled and often misused. It just literally means the course of one's life, or the curriculum of one's life. Basically, everything you've done, where you went to school, what types of activities in which you've engaged. And of course, you want to tailor that to the specific program you are seeking entrance into or position for which you're applying. A resume is more of a briefer document, one that focuses upon skills, one that is more tailored to employment, to the job, to the workforce than to the academic sphere. But ultimately, you want to be able to craft what it is you're supposed to submit. And these are among the things that Dr. Engbers and I hope that we can really give you some guidance on this afternoon to enhance your prospects for success as you navigate the remainder of your academic programs here and beyond. So I'll use that as an opportunity to sort of wrap up the introductory remarks that I had for you, and I'll turn back over to Dr. Engbers at this time, and we'll go from there.
All right, so thank you very much. So the next step for us is to engage you a little bit. We have pulled together a couple of sample resumes, 2 or 3 sample resumes that we would like your feedback on. So if you feel comfortable turning on your camera, I would encourage you to do that. If not, you can certainly participate either through the chat function or by unmuting yourself. But I'm going to pull up a couple of resumes. I'm going to put the link to these resumes in the chat box, but I'm also going to share my screen so that you can see them. And we just want to get your reaction to them. What do you like? What do you not like? What stands out to you? What might you take away from this or not take away from these resumes? So let's start with the first one. Okay. So this is Alcott McCoy, and you can see Alcott's got an address and contact information up front. It's a professional profile, a section on highlights, and then works sequentially through the professional experiences from the most recent to the oldest, and ends with education experience at the end. So as you look at Alcott's resume, what stands out to you? I'll give you a minute to look through it.
I think another interesting way perhaps to approach this resume as you're looking at it is to ask yourself what you think that Mr. McCoy is doing with it. Is he seeking a job? Is he looking to be accepted into an academic program? What do you think the purpose of this resume is?
So maybe we'll start with a pretty broad question. Oh, I got a chat comments. Let's see.
Yeah, Bethany wrote, I think the purpose is for employment. I like the simple, organized feel. I like that Alcott's name is at the top and in bold.
Right. So that's that issue of if you can't tell who the resume belongs to, then that's a bad start. So we have a very clear identification up front of who the resume belongs to. It is cleaner. I will tell you, in preparing this workshop, and this is a humorous rabbit hole you can go down if you're ever interested. But I took the liberty of Googling worst resumes ever, and it's it's exactly what you think you're going to find. Such as the drug dealer who is applying for a logistics job and trying to explain how his experience in marijuana distribution is related to business logistics, and everything in between. But one of the things that stood out to me from some of the bad resumes is how busy they were. There was just a million different things going on in them. Other reactions to this one?
Okay. Kim wrote she's not seeing any teamwork.
Right, so we might think about, well, what are the skills that a particular employer might be looking for?
And I think there you want to refer to the posting for the position. You know, if the position states that you know the teamwork is an essential requirement to success in the position, you definitely want to highlight somewhere that you have experience working in teams.
Is there anything that's on this resume that you wouldn't include, or anything that you would include that's not on this resume?
I'm not.
I think I would include some. Sorry, Kim. I think I would include some more, accomplishments. I think we see a lot of generalities in his experience, but it's really not highlighting that the role that he's performed as that manager.
That is a great point. That's a great point. And in fact, when I come back at the end with my 11 most important tips for resume revisions, that's one of them. That there's a lot of resumes that read as though they have taken their job description and put it into a resume. Well, doing your job and accomplishing things at your job are not the same thing, right? So if your resume focuses on what you do, that's a start, but it's not nearly as impactful in having your resume stand out as being able to talk about how the organization is different because of your presence in the organization. How you are able to make your mark in that job. How about you, Kimberly? What were you going to say?
I was going to say I didn't see anything like outside interests, outside organizations. This is pretty much a write-up of what somebody does 9 to 5. Oh, okay.
Right, and so what that points out to us is that while your resume should be job relevant, there are lots of things that are job relevant that may not be as part of your paid work experience. So if you're serving on boards, or if you're volunteering, or if you're working on projects in classes as part of your graduate program, these are things that may be important to an employer because they demonstrate that you've acquired a skill set, but aren't reflected in terms of what you're doing between 9 and 5. So this resume is pretty clean. This is not one of the 10 worst resumes that you find online. It's a pretty typical example of what I would call a chronological resume. So it's a resume that focuses on professional responsibilities over time. As an alternative structure, let's look at a functional resume.
Just note, as Dr. Engbers is moving, in the experience, the chronological listing from most recent to latest, there aren't gaps. Sometimes a gap of multiple years on a resume will prompt one to ask, what was the person doing in that time, and why does she or he not wish to share that? Is there something there that is potentially disqualifying? So if you can avoid long gaps, you should do so. Attempts to explain what was happening in those interim periods is also, I think, very beneficial.
Yeah, and as I put this next resume on here, I noticed that Tim had a comment. He noticed that the applicant moved from London to California. And that is, in some sense, it's not an issue of gap, but it does raise the issue that employers are going to ask, why did you switch jobs? Especially if perhaps it's a lateral move or a change of field. And so thinking about the resume that you present and what questions do you expect that that resume will introduce to your prospective employer? And so in this functional resume, you will see that while at the end, so they've got a qualification summary, they've got their experience highlights and a chronological employment history. But what they've done is they've structured their experience not around job responsibilities, but around particular skill sets. And then so they've got their employment history, they've got their education and training. They do have that community involvement that I don't know if it was Kim or Tara brought up earlier. So they've taken a little bit of a wider approach.
So if we're ready to comment on this one, the one thing that really stands out is her progression of her career. It seems to be going from the administrative support to management, which I would see as flipped. And with this resume, I would think she'd be going for an administrative support position as opposed to a management position, which she has held. So I'm just a bit confused on this one.
Okay. So it's perhaps not as immediately clear about what the ambition is associated with this.
And I think I like the experience highlights just as an idea, but when you get down to the employment history, I think dates need to be there so you can see what is the progression. Like she said, it is a CE manager, it's in the middle. Does that mean the accounting assistant is a better job than the manager? I'm confused, but maybe if there were some dates, I might get an idea.
Yeah, or you also wonder, what are they hiding by not including the dates, right? So if they're rapidly moving between positions, then that is often a red flag.
Right.
So we did get a question in the chat box about length. What is the right length for a resume? And this is in a little sense a loaded question, because like so many other things, it depends. I will share, I remember when I was in college, when I went to a business school, there was a hard and fast one-page limit. You had one page to communicate your professional highlights for business-related occupations. I don't feel as though that standard holds anymore. Though certainly I think for many employers, 2 pages is probably a maximum, though there are exceptions. If you were to go to work for the federal government, there's something that they call a government resume, which is often 5 to 10 pages. If you are seeking an academic job, those resumes could be 15 to 20 pages. If the kind of more the curriculum vitae model that Michael was discussing. If you're seeking international jobs, there are different cultural norms about what a resume looks like in different areas. And so I would say, as a rule of thumb, 1 to 2 pages for a professional occupation is pretty traditional, but there are certainly exceptions to that.
One of the other interesting things that I came across quite a few times in preparing for this workshop was that a resume is typically or often defined as a 2-page document. I think, as Dr. Engbers just said, that's not really a hard and steadfast rule. You really want to craft it on a personal level and give the employer or the institution what they want. But another thing that I came across quite a bit is to consider what is almost certainly a fact, that one reviewing the resume is unlikely to read the resume in its entirety. You really want to make it stand out, to be unique, but also to be easily digestible to the one reading it, and where you highlight those things you want the potential employer or the potential colleague to know about you. And if that can be done in 1 page, great. If that can be done in 2, that's what it takes. As Dr. Engbers mentioned, a CV in the academic world is often considerably longer. And that's also depends on, one's point in life. My CV today is a few pages longer than it was when I started at USI 20 years ago, because I've had a number of presentations and publications and different positions along the way, which I add to that document. But the same guiding principles I think are critical. That you want to be accurate, that you want to be concise, and that you want to highlight to the employer those things you want the employer to know, but also addressing at the same time those criteria that are requested in terms of experience and or skills in any posting for the position.
So I wanted to point out this example of this functional resume, because I think this is a format that you don't see quite as often as the chronological resume, but I think is very high impact. Because when an employer is looking to hire you, they are looking to see whether your skills align with the responsibilities of that job. And this functional format makes that immediately clear. So if I know the person that I need to hire someone with good customer service experience, I can drill down right there and find that customer service is something that they have identified as their 3 highlights. The other thing that I like about this format is that it gives you an opportunity to talk about things that may not fit within a specific job responsibility. And so for those of you who are in the MPA program, if you have developed a fundraising plan as part of a class, which many of you have done, that's a really valuable skill. But where do you put that on your resume? Because it doesn't fit with a job. It's a product of your educational experience. But in this case, it gives you an area to where you can talk about those types of experiences in a very natural way. Let's take a look at one more resume. Okay, Kim likes the photo, but she doesn't like the boxes. Other reactions?
Kim, what is it about the boxes you don't like? And I just preface that by saying I agree with you.
Well, I don't think the link has come through yet, so I'm only seeing the screen sharing, and I don't know what the boxes mean, but who cares? So, I mean, I don't get why English is 5 boxes and Spanish is only 2. So she's watched Sesame Street. I mean,
yeah, I think what's that's a great question, and I'm inferring here, but I think I'm right. But it's meant to indicate the level of proficiency on a scale of 5. My level of English proficiency is 5. Scale of 1 to 5, my level of Spanish proficiency is a 2. One of the things I don't like about this, in addition to it being unclear, and I have to infer what the scale is the relatively speaking arbitrary nature of the grading system or the scaling system. I'm more interested in some comment on your specific experience utilizing Spanish or German or whatever it is, rather than having you tell me my Spanish proficiency is a 2 out of a 1 through 5 scale. I think Meredith had a
honestly, I think it's too busy for me. It's a little jumbled. It's hard to read. All of the background takes my eye away from it, and I really don't want to read it.
I think Meredith put in the chat that she found the background distracting. It looks kind of like a science experiment or something, or a bunch of hexagons joined together. I kind of agree with that, as well as what you just said, Tara. And Tim added that he was told when he graduated from undergraduate not to put a photo on a resume from the career courses he had taken. Has that changed by today's standards, he asks.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something I specifically chose this one because of the picture, because Michael and I were talking about that. Michael, what percentage of resumes did you say you get that have pictures on them?
You know, maybe 1 out of 20 or something like that. You know, 5% potentially of the resumes that I review have a photograph.
You know, I think that the thing about the photograph is, in some sense, it makes the resume more human. Gives you a personal connection. But I have some reservation about it, like Tim learned in his class. I mean, for one I think it opens your situation up for potential discriminatory practices, especially if you're a member of a recognizable group, that may interfere with the hiring. And unless your resume is a resume for a model, it's most likely not job relevant, you know, and you want the content of your resume to be job relevant.
Yeah,
For
Bethany,
me, it is important
Bethany just
that this
added,
resume is for an architecture job. If we were talking about,
we just lost Dr. Engbers there for a moment, or is everybody still there?
looks like I got kicked out for a moment, but and so you know, I don't want to say that there's not a place for creativity. I think that there are, and in many occupations that's going to be an expectation, but you want to make sure that you're communicating something very specific when you decide to undertake those options. You know, you know, as I was preparing today, one of the things that I thought about sharing is the scene from Legally Blonde. I don't know if people have seen Legally Blonde, where she has a pink scented resume. You know, that communicates something. And if that's what you're trying to communicate, then that may be appropriate. But for many positions, that's not the goal of what you're trying to achieve. And Kim says, and pink resumes don't really scan well. I would guess scented resumes don't scan well either. Other reactions before we kind of keep moving? Yeah, I think each of these resumes has something to contribute, but they also introduce their own challenges from an employment standpoint. And so what I wanted to spend a little time with next is talking about some tips that I have based on working with other people and a lot of resumes that I've seen that I think can help refine that. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint slide to facilitate this, but I want to encourage you to interrupt with questions. As I talk, don't be afraid to push and probe. And when I start sharing screen, Michael, I'm not sure if I'm going to see the chat anymore. So if you could cue me in if I miss something, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So let me share this.
One thing I noticed from the second resume is that there was not an email address present as contact information. Wouldn't that be something that you would want to add, as employers would like to contact, preferably by email?
I didn't notice that, Sarah, but I would say overwhelmingly.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah.
And in fact, one of the advantages that I thought about the last resume that we by and large thought was kind of busy was that the candidate communicated a wide range of communication mechanisms. You know, she was really, and that demonstrates not only a level of technical competency, but also a receptivity to talk through a number of different channels. All right, so first one, what I call the rule of different. The rule of different. You want to use your resume to help you stand out, to help the employer know what you offer that no one else offers. I remember a few years back having a conversation with a friend of mine that went to Cornell. Cornell's a good school, and I asked him, if he felt like going to Cornell really helped him gain employment opportunities that he wouldn't have had he not gone to a school with quite the perhaps name recognition. And what he said to me, I thought was really telling. He said it wasn't that going to Cornell opened a lot of doors. It was that when he went to Cornell, he took a class in wine tasting. And everyone that he meets wants to talk about wine tasting. And so here's this example of something that's probably not job relevant, but makes him interesting, makes him unique in such a way that employers, that people that are interviewing want to continue a conversation with him. Another example, I've made a commitment to my children that when they turn 13, I'm going to canoe with them from Cincinnati to Evansville. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of canoeing, but the goal of this exercise is that when they go out into the world, they will have done something that no one else has done. And that gives them something that makes them interesting to talk to other people. And so if you think about your resume and what goes on your resume, you want to structure your resume in such a way as to highlight the things that make you different. There are various numbers out there, but I saw a study of eye tracking. So they gave employers a set of resumes and asked them to sort through them. And the average employer spent about 7.5 seconds looking at any particular resume. So if they're spending 7.5 seconds, as Michael said, they're not reading everything on their resume. And in the United States, we read left to right, top to bottom. So the things that are most important, the things that you want them to really focus in on are the things that are going to be in the top left corner. And so that's where you put the stuff that makes you different. And for most of you, as graduate students, the thing that makes you stand out is that you have a graduate degree. Now, some of you are coming into this with lots of professional experience, in which case education may be later in your resume. But if that's not the case, most likely education is going to be towards the top because that's something that's going to make you stand out. 2, what was I saying? So again, this kind of brings up this issue of a very short attention span from the standpoint of reviewers. As people look at your resume, they're not going to be spending a lot of time. And so you don't want them to lose track, right? So if your resume is too busy, if there's too much going on, if the important stuff is later in the resume, they're going to lose track. You want that high impact material to be towards the front and to be formatted in such a way that it really draws your reader's attention to it. Resumes and bar fights. So I don't know if anyone has ever been in a bar fight. To be honest, I've never been in a bar fight, but I imagine that if I were, that good advice for being in a bar fight is to don't start a bar fight unless you can finish a bar fight. And I think the same thing is true for your resumes. Someone asked this question about how long is my resume supposed to be? And I said, well, 1 or 2 pages. If it's an academic resume, maybe 9 pages or 12 pages. A government resume, maybe 7 pages or 10 pages. But what it shouldn't be is 1 1/4 page. When I get a resume that's 1 1/4 page, it makes me think that the person is not sufficiently experienced to be able to fill 2 pages of material. And so if it's 1 1/4, then make it 1. If it's 2, then make it 2. But you don't want to kind of be in that limbo zone. Michael,
I would add there, I would add there that if you're attempting to follow through on Dr. Engbers' suggestion that you have a full page, if you're somewhere at the 1.5 page, don't make it 2 pages by adding a 1/2 page of really what I would just refer to as filler, something not really relevant, just so that you can have a second page. You might want to consider cutting that half page. That has the potential to be the stronger resume by far.
Right. High impact. And you also don't want to make it one page by making it 9-point font. That's the other thing that I've seen is you need that font to be, for your body text, at least 11 or 12. Because if it's hard to read, then they're not going to read it. They're not going to read it. Okay. Some people are incompetent. So this was the issue that came up earlier. I think it was perhaps Tara that made the comment about focusing not on your responsibilities, but on your accomplishments. There's so many resumes that I see where I look through job at a time and the person is telling me, this is what someone in my position does. Well, what someone in your position does is not the same thing as what you do. Right? You could have a job and that job has responsibilities, but if you're not excelling at them, if you're not making your own impact, then I don't want to hire you. You want to make sure that you're talking about what is it that you have done in that organization that has increased performance. What are the things that you have done in that job that has made the organization more successful than if someone else was in that job? How are you as an individual contributing? And that often gets lost. Resumes and supermodels. This is a bullet that's really about the fact that appearances matter. So you can be the most qualified candidate, the one that is going to help the organization move forward the most. But if your resume doesn't encourage the hiring agent to take you seriously, then that's going to be a problem. And so at the most basic level, this is a lesson about professionalism, right? Are things spelled right? Are there complete sentences? Do you use appropriate punctuation and capitalization? But I'd go even more than that there is an aesthetic quality to it. Is there enough white space? Is there too much white space? Do you have clear and meaningful headers? Is your font readable? I must admit, I respond to resumes where the font has serifs better than resumes when the font doesn't have serifs. That doesn't have anything to do with the qualifications of the candidate. It's just a matter of the fact that makes it easier for me to read. That's not, now I will say there are also people that respond better to fonts that don't have serifs, right? So, one of the things that I was hoping that would come out as we looked at those resumes earlier is that some interpretation of resumes is idiosyncratic. So while Kim really liked the pictures, I didn't like the picture, and you never know who the hiring agent is going to be. They may be a person that's waiting for a picture to come through, or they may be a person that's disqualifying any resume with a picture on it. So you want to be looking at your resume as a total package of what looks good. What will a typical person find aesthetically pleasing? Six, math for job seekers. This is designed to encourage you to think about impact in ways that are quantifiable. So if you're a fundraiser, not just saying that you are a fundraiser, but being able to say you raised $400,000 for your organization, or you increased the number of volunteer hours by 22%, or not that you supervise people, but that you supervise 3 professional level employees. The ability to quantify your impact will help your resume stand out. Don't just talk about budget authority. Talk about the scope and size of your budget authority. Those numbers really will distinguish you as you relative to other resumes. Okay. Help me help you. Help me help you is really about getting you to think about how you read a job description and paying attention to the language that exists in the job posting. You know, I will tell you that this is especially true for large employers. Increasingly, large employers like Microsoft or the federal government are using artificial intelligence to screen resumes. And those programs are looking for very specific language. So if you are looking at a job posting that says that they are looking for someone to be a Spanish instructor, you may have 20 years of Spanish teaching experience. If you use the word teaching on your resume instead of the word instruction on your resume, there is a chance that that software will filter out your resume. And even if it's a small employer who isn't using artificial intelligence for resume screening, using the language of the post, mirroring the linguistics that you see in the job announcements, sends a message to the employer that your resume is carefully tailored for that job. So you're not just sending out dozens of resumes to every job you find. You have spent time thinking about that job and how your skills fit with their requirements. And that will help you stand out. So thinking about that language and how you are paying attention to it and incorporating it into your resume. And don't get me wrong, this takes time. It takes lots of time because you're tweaking and revising your resume for each position that is open. But it is something that will take you to the next level because so many other people don't do it. Okay. Sophie's Choice. This is a reference that probably dates me a little bit. Sophie's Choice is well, you don't need to know about Sophie's Choice, but basically this is articulating that there's a hard decision. And for me, the hard decision is whether or not to use a skill-based resume, like the second resume we showed you, or a chronological or historical resume, like the first resume that I've showed you. You can't go wrong. Both of them have their own advantages and disadvantages. And so what I would encourage you to think about is which one of those formats is going to do the best at helping you get the job. And that's gonna depend on a number of factors. It's gonna depend on how much experience you have. If you don't have a lot of experience in the areas that the job is looking for, a chronological resume probably makes more sense for you than a skill-based resume. You know, do you have experiences that you want to articulate that may not be reflected in your work experience? Then a skill-based resume might be more appropriate for you. How much do you want to work? If I have a chronological resume and a skill-based resume, it doesn't take me any time at all to update my chronological resume for a new job that I apply for. It takes me a lot of time to update my skill-based resume for a new job because I'm basically starting from scratch. I'm taking the job posting, identifying 4 or 5 skills, and then thinking about my long employment history and how I use those to argue for those skills.
What did you, excuse me, Professor Trent, the chronological you said is useful for what again?
So I think that the chronological is useful if you don't have a lot of experience because that aligns with that job. So if you're switching fields, I think it's a very traditional approach. So if perhaps you're in an industry that's looking for something more conventionally, then a chronological resume may be more appropriate. And if there are norms in the profession, right? Each discipline has its own sense of what it's looking for. Though I will say I am seeing more and more employers that are open to skill-based resumes, just because it makes their jobs easier, because they can see right off the bat, is this person picking 3 or 4 competencies that align with what we're looking for?
And another quick question. So if they are graduating undergrad and going into the field, what would you suggest? And if they are graduate students getting ready for their field, is there a difference in what you would suggest?
It depends. It's
a great question, Jada.
If they've done an internship or not.
But I was looking at an applicant from an MPA student the other day, who is completing their undergraduate degree now, but had taken a hiatus in their academic career and worked for 5 years. And so they had some unique professional experiences that a typical 22-year-old wouldn't have. And so if I were working with them on a one-on-one basis to refine their resume, I think both formats could be appropriate for them, but I would probably use them in different ways based on what they were trying to communicate for that job. All right, so I don't know if I would make the decision exclusively based on, whether you're a recent graduate or not, between undergraduate or graduate, but rather how much work experience do you have? How much are you willing to deviate, and what is the professional norm? And how much time and effort do you have? If you find out about a job tomorrow and the posting is due, the job is due tomorrow, then that's probably going to change your approach than if you've got some time to work and to do some research.
Thank you.
All right, so I say I've got 11 tips, and we're talking about resumes, but I think that it's worth also bringing up the issue of cover letters. And so my last 3 tips are about cover letters as much as they are about resumes. So the first one is, it's not me, it's you. So there are a lot of cover letters that are really focused on the skills and qualifications of the candidate, and are blind to the characteristics of the organization in which they're applying. And that's something I really want to discourage in a resume, that your resume is just as much about the employer who you are seeking as it is about you. And so I actually have kind of a template that I use when I write a cover letter. And the first paragraph is where I talk about the mission of the organization. What is it that the organization does? What are the organization's core values? And I do bring it to me. I talk about what's attractive to me about that mission, what is attractive to me about those core values, and what way are those values consistent with my values. But it's narrowly tailored to that organization. I'll tell you, Michael, you probably haven't heard this story before, but my first academic job out of grad school, I had a job offer from a major state institution, and I was sitting on this offer, and I was thinking about it, and I noticed a new job posting for an institution that I thought was my dream institution to work for, besides USI. And because I left that place to come to USI. And I called up the hiring agent. And I said to them, I have a job offer, but I don't want to work for them. I want to work for you. And this is what it is about your mission that makes me want to work for you. And they later told me that conversation was what got me the job. More than my resume, more than my presentation that I gave when I came on campus, the fact that I understood mission and fit. And I wasn't looking for a job, I was looking for a specific job, a specific type of organization. And your cover letter is your opportunity to really have that conversation without calling them up. Make it clear that you want them and what it is about them that you are attracted to.
Yeah, I would say here too, just quickly to interject that, sometimes in the review process, if the potential employer is dissuaded from your candidacy by the CV, that person's not even going to read the cover letter. So, the CV, the resume is really what's going to open the door to allow that person to engage in your cover letter and the other materials that you would submit, and hopefully to an in-person interview and further an offer.
Yeah, and I don't want to overstate the fact that qualifications don't matter, right? So that wasn't, hopefully that was not the takeaway from that story. Because Michael's right, we think about, this packet, right? You submit this packet and the cover letter's on the front and the resume's on the back. But at least from personal experience, I always look at that cover letter before I read that resume, right? If they're not demonstrating through that cover letter, then it's unlikely that I'm going to get to that. If they're not demonstrating it through the resume, it's unlikely that I'm going to spend much time with that cover letter. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Which actually probably fits pretty well as a great transition to the 10th point, which is being careful about stuttering, right? So, I think about stuttering, I think about repeating myself over and over again. I can't tell you how many cover letters I see that are basically a narrative description of what's in the resume. Right, so they are using the cover letter to describe the resume in
narrative form.
In narrative form, in sentence form. And if they're looking at your resume first, then you're not giving them any new information. You want that resume, you want that cover letter to give them new information. And so I would encourage you to think about your cover letter as an opportunity to tell stories. And at some point in time, you took an English class and you learned about writing a story, and that there's problems and there's characters and there's a resolution of the problem, right? And so if you want a really engaging cover letter, don't be afraid to tell a story, to talk about specific experiences in terms of ways that you've overcome challenges or values that you've developed that you want to live out in your professional career. The cover letter can really give them a sense of who you are as a person, independent of your qualifications. Because the qualifications will get your foot in the door, but if you're not a good fit, not only are they not going to hire you, you don't want to be there. And so you using that cover letter to help them understand who you are will build on that resume rather than just duplicate that resume.
I'm going to add here too that one of the skills that all employers are seeking from their employees that might not be stated explicitly in a job posting, is the ability to communicate well. And I'm tying this in here with the art of storytelling to a degree. But you really want to be able to convey to the potential employer in both the resume and also the cover letter that your communication skills are effective, that you know how to customize it, that you know how to engage the one listening or to engage the one reading. And a big part of that too is, again, accuracy. Here, not necessarily accuracy of facts, as I spoke about earlier, but accuracy with respect to spelling, any type of punctuation that you might use. You really don't want there to be contained within either of these critical documents any type of error that might make the one screening it think less of your candidacy. And I think one of the best ways by which to get around that is to ensure that you have someone else read your cover letter. Make sure you have someone else read your resume or your CV before you submit it to the potential employer. That's something I recommend always to my students when writing a report or a paper. It's something that I still engage in personally when I write for my own purposes. And that is, I think, a really critical piece. And I'd like to push that back too to the observation Dr. Engbers was making about a resume ought to be aesthetically pleasing. I agree with that entirely. But just consider for a moment that what I think might be aesthetically pleasing might not be what the employer thinks is aesthetically pleasing. Get a second opinion on that. Get someone else's feedback on that.
So I think we've got a little time for questions. If other things that have emerged, things you're thinking about based on this conversation, I'll perhaps stop sharing. I know we've lost a few people because we're nearing the end of our time, but it sounds like Tim had a suggestion he wanted us to consider for a future program.
Yes, I apologize for to everybody for not having my video on. I'm trying to conserve bandwidth at this time, but it was this was very informative, and I needed this. And heading into the future, I did want to make a friendly suggestion for a future topic potentially, and then that is what are today's interviewing standards? What should we, as potentially job seekers, what is considered okay or not okay? And I draw from my experience. When I was coming out of my undergrad about 20 years ago, they said no facial hair, no nothing, it's always got to be suit and tie, corporate America like. But that was 20 years ago also. And, I sit here with a Grizzly Adams beard. Now, I don't know if that's appropriate these days or if it's not, or just those kind of nuances.
And then I would piggyback on what he was saying, headshots. We recently took headshots last semester, and when I got them back, I kind of was like, ooh. So if there's a kind of rule of thumb as far as like the background or what should be in it, some girls had their hair back here, some here, what are they looking for when they see a headshot besides for just, overall neatness?
I'm going to thank both Tim and Jada for those comments. One of the things I was going to mention as we got to the end here today was that I'm hoping to send out to each of you within a week or so, hopefully less, a very brief Qualtrics summary survey, just to get some feedback from you on what we've done here, what we might change. But lastly, what are some suggestions for additional professional workshops that graduate studies might be able to sponsor to help all of you become more successful. So those are great ideas. We'll take those into consideration and see what we can do.
Thank you so much for today. Appreciate it.
You're wonderful. Thank you.
And then otherwise, thank you all for coming. We had great participation and engagement. And so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Engbers, for your help, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.